Mary Trump is Donald Trump's niece, if I understand it correctly. And so Mary Trump did a first book discussing Donald Trump's psychology. Now she's doing a second book called The Reckoning, where she discusses Donald Trump's supporters psychology. So if we're ready, by the way, thank you everyone for joining us, and let's play the video. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I think it's only about 15 minutes where they talk about where they talk about the supporters, and then they move on to some other discussion that we're going to
not talk about
once they reach that discussion. So here we go.
In her first book, psychologist Mary Trump diagnosed her uncle, Donald Trump, and the pathologies that he brought to the presidency. In her new book entitled The Reckoning, Mary Trump widens the focus around patient Donald Trump to include the 74 million Americans who support his pathologies. Mary Trump writes, "I have heard people say, this is not who we are, but right now this is precisely who we are. Thanks to an outdated and inherently biased political structure exemplified by the undemocratic Electoral College, which has repeatedly put the losing Republican candidate in office, and a divided Senate in which one half of the membership represents 41 million fewer citizens than the other. We are a nation in which a virulent minority has an outsized voice and the majority, underrepresented and forced into a bystander role, suffers mightily in silence. We are going to be dealing with the consequences of the Trump administration, the pandemic, and particularly the insurrection of January 6th for a very, very long time, just as we are going to be confronting the fact that 74 million people wanted 4 more years of whatever they thought they got in the last 4. Joining us now is Mary Trump, author of the new book, The Reckoning, Our Nation's Trauma and Finding a Way to Heal, which comes out on August 17th. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.
It's great to be here, Lawrence.
So it seems diagnostically you've widened the focus on the patient you were examining in your last book. And in that book, of course, your focus was wide enough to include your family members, Donald Trump's father, and what shaped him in the family. Now you're taking a look at the country that shaped him, the country he grew up in, the lies this country has told to itself, which is all part of Donald Trump's own conditioning in lying about himself throughout his life.
Yeah, when I started to formulate the idea for this book, we were back in the worsening era of COVID, the second wave. I believe it was in September, October. It was still before the election. Things were looking quite desperate politically and from a health standpoint. And I wanted to figure out how we got to this place where we were so vulnerable as a country on almost every level. Our democracy was on the brink. The American experiment was on the edge of failure. And hundreds of thousands of Americans were dying needlessly because of the malfeasance and ineptitude of Donald's administration. And it seemed that I felt like we needed to go back farther to figure out how it seemed that so much unraveled in such a short period of time. And I found 2 really interesting and disturbing coincidences, similarities between what I found in my family and what I found in American history. One is Donald's never been held accountable, and historically, practically no powerful white men have been held accountable in America. And also that we never looked clearly at where we came from slavery to the end of the Civil War and the failures of Reconstruction on through the present day.
You write in the book about Donald Trump. He is constitutionally incapable of making the right choice in any way, real or imagined. Doing so might conflict with his self-interest. Because COVID hit blue states first and was found to affect communities of color disproportionately, it was even easier for him to make that choice. It also ensured that his base would embrace the China virus is a hoax narrative because it reinforced their belief in white supremacy and catered to their own need for divisiveness. That is the first explanation I've read about what's happened on that disbelieving side of the country about COVID-19.
Yeah, and another thing that became incredibly clear, I mean, not that we all shouldn't have been aware of it, and many of Americans have been aware of it forever, is the extent to which white supremacy has played a role and continues to play a role. And one thing Donald did is expose the extent to which being an open racist is a winning proposition in the Republican Party. And all of these things are connected, and we need to start seeing them that way, or I'm afraid we're never going to be able to get beyond it.
Well, yeah, the Republican Party's been trying to appeal in varying degrees of shaded language since 1968, at least 64 with Barry Goldwater, to the racist side of our voting. They were trying to get those Southern Democrats who had been voting for racist Southern Democrats. And Donald Trump came along and just took all the shading away from it and just made it extremely clear he's one of them.
Yeah, and it's remarkable. Well, maybe it shouldn't be remarkable, quite honestly, but it's disheartening, shall we say, just how effective it is, just how appealing that is to so many people to have been given that permission. And it's no accident that practically 100% of the people at the insurrection were white people. And it's no accident that the Republican leadership has embraced Donald, has embraced what the rest of us might view as the worst things about him, which are the worst things in America, because they know they have a very narrow path to stay in power, and it is by appealing to the worst instincts in the American people.
Another passage in your book says, Donald is an instinctive fascist who is limited by his inability to see beyond himself, or as the historian Timothy Snyder puts it, his vision never went further than a mirror. Still arguing about whether or not to call Donald a fascist is the new version of the media's years-long struggle to figure out if they should call his lies lies. What's more relevant now is whether the media and the Democrats will extend the label of fascism to the Republican Party itself. Should we extend that label to the Republican Party?
Without question. It's a waste of time, and quite honestly, it's a waste of our opportunity to turn things around. The next year and a half will be incredibly crucial to see if we can put a stop to this trend. And the Democrats in particular and the media in general have to face this in a way that demonstrates that they understand the seriousness of the threat. Democrats can't keep playing by old rules because Republicans have burned the rule book. There are no rules anymore. So pulling punches and using language that's polite isn't going to get us where we need to be.
I have a lot more notes here about your book, and if you can stay with us across a couple of minutes of commercials, we can get in a few more questions.
I'd love to.
Okay, great. We'll be right back with Mary Trump. In her new book entitled The Reckoning, Mary Trump writes, the United States engages in its own form of toxic positivity, a series of deep denials that perpetuates our two-tiered system, maintains double standards, and keeps our wounds from healing. This recurring urge to move on, this impatience with doing the hard work of atonement, of accountability, of tearing down the structures of oppression and rebuilding new ones that work for everybody traps us in the same cycle of privilege and denial of privilege that keeps us separate, hostile, and suspicious. And Mary Trump is back with us. That passage there where you just talked about this recurring urge to move on, the impatience with doing the hard work of atonement. We are seeing a version of that in the Republicans' reaction to a January 6th committee in the House now to investigate exactly what happened on January 6th and leading up to it.
We are, and it shouldn't surprise us. We've been seeing the Republican Party make the conscious decision to put up with Donald from the election onward, despite his egregious behaviors, despite his unconstitutional behaviors, despite the fact that he's cruel, incompetent, and has done so much damage to this country, because they believe that's what they need to do in order to stay in power, no matter how illegitimately. What's equally, if not more troubling, however, is the inaction by the DOJ, as far as I can tell, to delve into what was really going on in this administration in terms of trying to steal the last election and trying to determine who in the administration was involved in organizing the insurrection. We have active seditionists in our government right now. And if we don't deal with this, if we don't face this and hold people accountable, which again is something this country has never been able to do from Robert E. Lee on down, then I really don't know what is too much. Because the message will be, if you get into power, you can get away with anything.
You make the point in the book that if Donald Trump had been convicted in the Senate trial, which, by the way, only would have required a minority of Republican senators to join with Democratic senators to get to that 2/3 threshold to meet that requirement. You say if he had been convicted, he would not have been able to run for office again. And you say, if nothing else, taking that step would have made it impossible for Donald to pretend he planned to run for the presidency again in 2024 and thereby shut down his ability to raise money off that pretense. My guess about this has been that he is not going to run again, and this is all about raising money. Is that what you're saying? You don't believe he's going to run again?
You know, Lawrence, I thought that for a long time because he lost so badly to Joe Biden that I didn't think he would ever want to put himself in a position of losing again. And I think that would have been the case if not for two things. One, that he seems still to be getting away with everything, right? And two, the Republican Party is trying to engineer a system in which the minority can come into power because of all of these. I think we're up to hundreds now of voter suppression bills that are being passed in every single state. So if they are successful in doing this, if they are successful in rigging the system even more in their favor, then if Donald gets the message that if he runs, he can't lose because it's going to completely break his way, then I'm not so sure. And that's pretty depressing.
Well, I'm not so sure he isn't going to be a convicted criminal defendant by that time, either in Georgia or in Manhattan. And the other weird thing about this is, having said that even if he is convicted of state crimes in Georgia, I'm not sure that prevents him from running for president again.
And that it's an evergreen problem, right? I think that in some horrifying ways increases his credibility with his party. You know, so we're in a pretty bad situation right now, and I hope you're right. I hope that especially the New York AG and the DA, that they are able to hold him accountable for crimes that he allegedly committed decades ago and has been committing over decades, financial crimes, et cetera. But again, it would be as if he's still getting away with the big stuff, and the people around him are still getting away with the big stuff. And when is it going to stop?
Is there a passage that I missed in my dabbling with social psychology in college that explains the 74 million Trump voters?
Yeah, there's actually a large part of one chapter entirely devoted to trying to understand those 74 million people. And what I'll say about that is one of the worst things about not having him convicted, besides allowing him to run in the future, was that he was allowed to run in 2020. He was treated as a totally normal candidate, and it allowed 74 million people to give their support to him. And representation matters, and sometimes that's an incredibly good thing, and it doesn't happen enough, but sometimes it's a really bad thing. So 74 million people were allowed to express their support and feel their power, and so was he. So the wrong message was sent, and it's put us in a really dangerous situation.
Mary Trump, your professionally trained insights into your uncle are invaluable to this audience and to this country. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Lawrence.
Mary Trump's new book is The Reckoning, Our Nation's Trauma and Finding a Way to Heal. Coming up, the Delta variant of COVID-19 is a...
Now, thank you everyone for joining on, and Judge Claudia Barber is with us here on You Be the Judge. We're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. You can also catch the shows. You can share it on Facebook. If you go to iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast stations, you put in You Be the Judge, and then you put in, and you'll find us, and you'll see us right there. Here's the thing. I read the book, and I was able to get the book. Of course, I read it, and I have a gift of reading like everyone else, but I'm actually a fast reader. When it comes to trauma, people are very affected in so many ways, physically, mentally, and spiritually. But when they kept mentioning the 74 million people, what we are not fully understanding when we talk about Trump and what he is and maybe what he isn't, we have to talk about America, and that was getting left out. And I think that's what she was trying to hopelessly focus on, is that there are still 74 million people who, whether they think he's crazy or he's sneaky like a fox, wanted what he was going to give them, the individual, another 4 years. So when you talk to people who are Trump supporters, ask them, understand what they were getting, because that's what Democrats have often not gotten. They think it's anti this. They ought to start giving what people need and deserve. Trump was giving people what they believed and what they believed they deserve. That's why he won the one time, and that's why he got 74 million votes. It's because people want something, and he was giving it to them. Now ask yourself, what did I miss that Trump was getting and giving? And if we could, I think that, do you understand what I'm talking about, Marylin? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And he was very good to his supporters. And that's really one of the criticisms that I have about the Democrats, because I don't think they are as kind to their supporters as Trump was to his supporters. For instance, some of the bills that Biden, I don't think is pushing enough, like the John Lewis bill, the George Floyd bill. I think he could do he could do more pushing. Even the bill in reference to evictions that Congressman Cori Bush had to basically, sit on the Capitol steps in order to bring recognition to the issue of so many people being evicted. Those kinds of things. I think they should be really lifting for the Democrats in terms of doing things for the people who supported them. Yet it's like pulling teeth without the proper dental equipment.
Correct. And that's their flaw. And they don't actually, there's a lot of stuff that the Democrats can do quickly for people who have been needing this for the last 80 years, and they have done nothing thus far yet. Okay, so where Trump acted quickly, precisely, and intentionally, right? Boom, 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 right?
And also he showed how it could be done.
Correct.
Before Trump, we heard a lot of, well, that's unconstitutional. You can't do that. The president is not allowed to do this. But yet he was allowed to do so much with executive orders and, other executive powers that he used. And you did not hear anybody, I guess I shouldn't say anybody. You heard very few people saying that what he was doing was unconstitutional. You heard that they did not agree with it, but in terms of the constitutionality.
Right. So I'm going to put this out there. And also when it comes to the book about the 74 million people, people were very surprised that 56% of black men voted for Trump. And people say, well, why? And I'm like, well, I'll tell you why. Well, one, their money was doing better. Their 401ks were doing better. More people don't vote for a person, they vote for personal. So if they can buy the new car that they've always wanted, that's what they're going to vote for. So, and I know most of the people who we talk to and who we are like-minded, we care about humanity and human beings. A lot of people really don't care about human beings. They really don't. If that was the case, then everybody would get the shot, right? Get the shot. But we don't care about others. We care about our own financial wealth. We care about our own households. We care about if we can go on vacation. We care about what we care about. We don't care about the suffering on the borders. We don't care about people struggling in the streets in lower income neighborhoods, economically depressed areas. Why? Because majority of people don't have to drive through those places. They intentionally don't ever have to go to those places. And they intentionally never really have to deal with those people. So why would I be concerned about voting for them if it's not putting money in my pocket, retirement for me, the extra house, the extra vacation? My grandchildren got to go to college. My children got to go to college. I have things to worry about. So when you start to talk about that, you say, okay, but there are other issues that needs to be taken care of, and if this gets taken care of, it all gets taken care of. That's too long-sighted for them. It's very personal for them, and that's where it becomes so intense when we talk about politics. We forget to talk about people, and people was what the republic is, what we are trying to form and keep in a whole in this country. Because if you only want to talk about politics, then you're talking about policy. And policy and politics very rarely have anything to do with people.
Yeah, I think that Holly wanted to say something because Holly, you unmuted.
Go ahead, Holly.
I wanted to say, I thought the most cogent part was he told black people, what do you have to lose? And do you know, I never heard a response. They had a lot to lose by voting for him.
Yeah, but the thing is, most black people say they lose anyway. So what's the difference? They lose with him in office?
But it was for someone to say there was a difference.
Yeah, but you can't, for the majority of black people who would vote, we're not talking about educated voters. So how many? No, we're really not. We're just not. We're not talking about.
Someone should.
No, because if you tally up the black and brown educated voters, that doesn't put you in the White House. Matter of fact, if you just count those black votes, you lose.
No. That's not the way it works. What happens is that they think that the Republicans are going to get, whoever the Republican candidate is going to get 50% of the white votes, and the other 50 will go to the Democrats. So that's why it makes a difference, the breakdown as to the percentage of Black people who vote. Because we could, I guess, educated voter or not, I'm not conceding that point, but since you brought it up, depending on how many of us come out, we determine the election. That's what the push is for. The push is not, just for our votes. The push is, we're going to get 50-50, of other people. So that's why Stacey Abrams did such a fabulous job in Georgia, because when you see all the heavy lifting that she did in Georgia to get out the vote and to get people to go to the polls who were actually voting, that's what the difference was. And as far as I understood, she didn't say to people, vote Democrat. She just said vote. You just vote. And that's what I tell people as well.
Me too.
You need to vote, because the politicians know who vote. Yeah. It is public information. We could look in there. We could see which election you voted for, which election you decided not to show up for. We cannot tell who you voted for, but it makes a difference as to who you vote. It makes a difference to vote, because when you walk into a politician's office, or when you're asking a politician for something, they want to know that, rain, snow, sleet or hail, you are going to show up at those polls to vote for, or
and the issue with the Black community is that Black women vote, Black men really don't vote. So that's an issue. But then we say, well, how come Black men don't vote? Well, the percentage of Black men vote are very little compared to the percentage of Black men who don't have economic security. They don't think about voting. They think about getting their next job. They think about staying out of prison. They're thinking about not getting arrested. They're thinking about not getting shot. They're thinking about all those things. There's a very small percentage out of 100 Black men. You have 10 professionals. You have 30 in jail, or at least on paper, what we consider they've either been in jail or gotten out of jail. So that's 30. Boom. So you got 30, 40, that's done. So where are the other 60? You got to count the young people? I'll give you 15 of those. 15 young people, they're doing their thing. So where's the other 45, right? So the 45 is what people are really angling for. Are they going to vote? Are they not going to vote? Do they really care? Where they are in their lives? That 45 gets split up, probably not even half, because they're either angling for a job, and if they're bitter, if something happens where something doesn't go their way, and that's just about the easiest way I'm going to put it, they're not going to vote because there's nothing for them to vote for.
Well, it becomes a catch-22. They don't vote, so therefore whoever's in power is not paying that much attention to them. And because of that, their lives aren't in a position which makes it easier for them to vote.
Correct. And
so therefore they don't vote. I mean, it's just so circular that, we've got to figure out something to do about that. And also some people don't know how to vote. Somebody asked me yesterday if they could vote online. And I'm like, not that I know of.
That's not a survey.
Yeah. And yes, you could do absentee voting. You could request a ballot online and then get your ballot mailed to you, and then you could then get your vote. But Pat is saying that in California you could vote online. Okay, but she was asking in Maryland. Well, Pat, do you want to tell us about that?
I was surprised actually when I found out after all the ringing around the roses, I call it, on election day. I finally got someone in California to say, hey, just go online and put your ballot and have an affidavit, which I did, and then I sent it overnight. Now, that's just California. I don't know about any place else.
quite interesting.
And I wonder if they did that because of the pandemic and they wanted to keep people safe. I wonder if was that just allowed in this past election. And if it is, I mean, you know, I actually see nothing wrong with voting online. It's just like filling out the ballot and penciling it in and mailing it in. It's just that when you mail it, it becomes certified because the postal office is actually a federal affidavit when you say you send something through the post office. So I think it's federalized that way. Actually, you can do copyrights that way. You can mail yourself your own writing, and you just don't have to open it. But because you mailed it, it becomes what you say. It's called the poor man's copyright. This actually was used for many years. That you write a whatever book or whatever song, and you can mail it to yourself, and that becomes the original copy. So, what did you guys think about what Mrs. Trump said about his heritage and how the country shaped him? And I actually, in things that we have not come to reckoning with, and I actually do believe we have not actually come to the conversation that there was strong feelings against humanizing Black America. And that is still affecting our judgments today. It's such a tough thing to really come to terms with, to say that we believe that you can be alive, but we didn't really want to humanize you on our level as white America. Like, yeah, you're a person, but you're not as equal a person. And I think that's still seems so struggling for many individuals today. And you're like, well, how is that possible if we're supposed to be an educated society? But we're an emotional society. We may be educated, but we're very highly emotional. And emotions play on not just how we think, but what we think and how we interpret what we think.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense until you think about the economic aspects of it. Some people, well, so some people don't like competition, and they feel that if other people were to be recognized as being on the same level, then they would have more competition and they would not be as financially stable as they find themselves now. And some people who aren't even financially stable agree with treating people as not being quite on the same level as they are, in the hope that, hey, I might not be financially stable today, but tomorrow, who knows?
Who knows?
And so therefore, I don't want you to be on the same level as I am, because once I get to be more financially stable, I still want somebody below me.
Do you guys remember when the EO first came out and it became a law that you had to hire or to look at the applicant who was of different race and religion? Do you remember when that really became a thing? Do you remember that at all? Any of you? It's about the 80s. When it became EO, like you had to hire a black person to put on your staff. You had to make sure they made it it was pushed on to different companies and people, and that didn't make people all that happy. Like you had to hire a woman, and then you had to hire this type of person. They're like, well, what if they're not qualified? They're like, so it made it an argument, because were people getting hired that wasn't qualified, or were people getting hired or given an opportunity who were also qualified and they just happened to be of a different color and different race? It really made people upset, because that's why when we talk about the human issue, that would have never came up if we ever thought on the human issue, right? So if we think on human issues, that's actually negated. And this is why certain things have to be like, listen, if she's qualified, if he's qualified, take the damn application. And they're like, yeah, but it's not for my company. That's not for you. You know what I mean? So people don't like being told what to do. And I think that's where the Democrats get a pushback on. because they're always being told what to do, where the Republicans, in a way, they just direct them to do. It's funny. It maybe it's semantics where they're both being told what to do, but it's how you tell them.
Oh, and I think you make a really good point as well. Well, first of all, I think President Kennedy started affirmative action, but it had no teeth. So Johnson came in and put some teeth into it. But as you were talking about, it wasn't really until the 80s that people were actually trying to live up to what Johnson was trying to do. And then there was the argument that they're not qualified. Somebody talked about sponsorship the other day, and I thought that was really, really interesting, because when you talk about affirmative action, there was this discussion about mentorship. You could get somebody who's qualified, but if you're not going to support that person and mentor that person, they're never actually going to be able to learn the job properly and grow into the job and maybe even get a chance to get into management. But this person actually spoke about sponsorship, and she said the difference between mentorship and sponsorship was that, and she said that she preferred sponsorship, because mentorship is, you tell somebody, go and do this, do that. But sponsorship is when you actually advocate for them. You pick up the phone and you call the person that you want the person you're sponsoring to know. And then you say, hey, I would like you to know this person. This person is amazing. And this is the reason why, this person would be good for your organization. And so that gets that person further than them calling and saying, oh, yes, well, so-and-so told me to call you. And I think that's also one of the things that we could talk about, because, like I said, you could give somebody a job and then say, well, they're doing a poor job. They don't fit into our culture. Therefore, they have to go. Which is what a lot of law firms actually do. You'll see that they hire people, they hire women, they hire other people, and then say, well, a couple of years later, this person doesn't fit into our culture. Well, did you sponsor them? Did you do something to help them fit into the culture, or did they have to feel their way through the dark?
It's almost like you're setting them up for failure on purpose.
Right.
Kathy, did you want to say something?
No, I think Marylin kind of spoke to the point I was going to try to make, because when affirmative action became effective, I think a lot of companies started just using quotas as opposed to applying qualified people. They just wanted to fill in the numbers. And then they get these people in their companies and they say, oh, they don't meet the standards and they don't fit into our culture. So therefore, what good is affirmative action? And that gave this reverse discrimination pathway for reverse discrimination. So I just think that we can apply affirmative action effectively by choosing qualified people and, like Marylin said, mentor them or find a way for them to fit into your culture. You find, 3 Black people to fit into an all-white firm, and then because they don't comply with the culture of the white firm, then they want to consider them not qualified. And that's where we're shooting ourselves in the foot sometimes.
And here's the problem with affirmative action. It still doesn't talk about the psychology of why you even had to have it. We still did not really understand, why is this even necessary if people are developing in a humanistic way? So it still seems so primal that it's my way, my corner of the world, my shelter, my food. It is still so lower rung animalistic thinking that you have to elevate someone thinking, and you would think that because of religious values, people would elevate their thinking. And religion doesn't elevate people's thought process. Actually, it actually concretes their primal way of what they result back to. The only way to hire someone's thinking and what you call higher level thinking, higher level vibrations, higher level reasoning skills is to get into what you call in the neuroscience the frontal lobe thinking, and that's reasoning and development. And that is having conversations with development as a process, not as a recourse to having an excuse or to have to defend something. When you have to defend something, you already fall back into primal issues. And if you fall back into primal issues, then you're not using your frontal lobe, and then there is no reasoning skills, there is no deductive and cognitive approach to it. Anytime you ever have to defend anything, whether someone says, well, why would you like that? Well, that's a question that you have to defend. It's not a thoughtful question, it's a defensive question. So, and we attack each other as humans in that simple sort of way. Even greetings is a defensive question. How are you today? It seems so attackable. Like, why are you asking me about how I'm feeling? And what is it? Why you want to do with that information? Hi is a greeting. How are you is a question. There is differences, and we tend to not understand that when we talk to each other on an emotional level, but we push them back into an animalistic and a primal understanding. And that's why thinking and reasoning seems so far apart. I'm sorry to get up.
Yeah, and I think that we cannot have this discussion without discussing what's been happening in reference to the schools. And some people are saying that they don't want race theory to be taught in school, because that then puts us back to, well, you have generations of people who don't understand what this country did. And just because, you love something doesn't mean like you love your country. I love this country, but I also recognize that there are some things that aren't good about it. And my hope is to talk about what's not good about it in order to improve it. But if we never talk about what's not good about it, then there would never be any improvement. And to me, that's what the people who are discussing, who don't want to have race theory thought in the schools are doing. They're like, there's nothing to see here. There's nothing to talk about. Everything is perfect. Let's just move on and talk about some other countries where, women aren't allowed to drive and, and there's all this poverty and all that kind of stuff.
And here's the thing, critical race theory, and someone had mentioned that to me. They said critical race theory is a socialistic way of teaching our children. I'm like, okay, well, let me ask you something. I don't want to weaponize your question, but if you did not teach equality, what do you call that teaching? I mean, that's my question, because if you're not talking about all races in your education and you're only hyper teaching on the few race, then what is that called? Is that race theory based teaching? But if you talk about a different culture outside of white, then it's race teaching? Because I'm curious about that. And they're like, well, I never looked at it that way. And I say, I understand that. And so I understand why you ask and say, if you're forcing someone to learn something that is socialistic. No, what we should have been doing in the beginning, or at least since 1964, is teach all racial inclusion. That's what we should have done. But because... Well,
I disagree with you. I think what we should have done in 1619 was to teach, because we wouldn't be here.
That's not happening. That's not happening.
Well, we wouldn't be here in 2021 having this discussion. It's kind of frustrating, because sometimes you feel like you're going around in a circle. Having a discussion with yourself, and people who should be involved, people who should be sitting at the table, they're sitting there going, I don't see anything, I don't hear anything, and I don't speak anything. And you're like, yes, it's not a criticism of you to say that things could be better. And this is what we need. This is the hard work that we need to do to get to better.
I just wanted to comment, this whole thing about critical race theory, first of all, they're applying that term to everything that has to do with race. But the reality is, critical race theory is nothing more than actual American history. Because, and so anybody who's trying to deny that it's being taught, that it should be taught, they're really just whitewashing everything so that they can proceed in the manners that they want to proceed, like, everything is fine and hunky-dory and America's great and beautiful, when in reality, America has a lot of issues that it needs to come to grips with first and deal with the whole entirety of American history, as opposed to just what they want us to hear.
I want to ask you guys a question, because this really comes up to when we talk about our history and we talk about the 74 million people. Just recently I was in Gettysburg and I was on the battlefield, and I'm a very emotional person. I was on the battlefield on Gettysburg and I just started to weep, because to me all the bloodshed was about two sides fighting over a dream of their own. The South had its own premise and its dream and idea, and the North was trying to cancel it out. Because the North technically didn't have a dream. The South was fighting for their personal living life, right? The North was saying, we don't agree with how you live. So that's a huge argument why, the Civil War was even
Well, I don't know. I think I want to be a little bit more precise than that, because to me, the North was saying you have all of this free labor.
Yes.
And so because you have all of this free
You're making
labor,
all this money.
Impacting us economically.
Yes. You're making a
I'm
lot
sorry,
of
Go
money.
ahead. I just, because sometimes the North terms, is portrayed as, they're such good people, and,
No, they wasn't.
in the North for a really long time, and they have issues as well.
Yeah, it was about economic wealth, and the South had it and the North wanted it. That was really it. And we never really came to terms with what that Civil War was actually really fought for. I mean, we actually blackwash it is a term with it was freedom of slaves. No, it was the crumbling of your labor force. That's all it was. Now, whether slaves got freed or not freed, or killed, and when they start to reclaim the South and the rebuilding of the South, a lot of blacks got killed, and they were like really okay with it.
Yeah, I was reading something where they discussed how America is addicted to free labor.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I to this day, and I thought that was really interesting, because I think that's what the Fight for 15 is about. Why should somebody have to work 2 or 3 jobs just so they could live in this just live a decent life?
Right.
As opposed to, hey, you work a job, you get paid a living wage, and you put in your 40 hours.
You're a socialist! Oh my God, living wage, you're a socialist!
Or maybe you're 35 hours, because that's what happens in Europe. And then you get to spend the rest of the time with your family, where you could bring up your children and teach them right from wrong, and they're not traumatized by having to be left so many hours during the day. And so therefore they have more to give to society when they become older. I just don't understand why people don't look into the bigger picture and look further ahead. It's always, okay, I'm only going to look, to see what's in front of my hands. And anything further than that, I'm just not going to process anything having to do with it.
And I think we are.
Society is run. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Joni.
No, go ahead, Joni.
I think you made a good point. Our priorities are different, are skewed, and that's because corporations are in control, and because their bottom line is profit. So whatever they have to do to secure that profit, if you have to work extra hours, you're doing it for the company. So that's their priority.
Well, Joni, my pushback to you is I'm going to give you a company. We're going to call it Joni W's company.
Okay.
Okay. What is your major priority?
Well, I'm a corporate executive.
No, it's your company. You're not a corporate executive. You own the company. What is your major objective?
My major objective is to sustain that business.
Okay. Which means what?
Well, okay,
make money.
I would definitely make my employees happy.
No, you don't. Joni,
I know.
Joni,
Listen, it's
stop
company,
it. Stop it. Stop it.
No. I understand what Joni's trying to say. What she's trying to say is that you could have a company where everybody does well.
Okay.
You know, and the company does well. How does it go? Does good by doing well. Does well by doing good. You know what I mean? Where you don't have to
by doing good.
Oh, thank you very much, Joni. Yeah, you don't have to squeeze your workers. You don't have to work them to the bone. You could just say, okay, you know what? I'm good with X% of profit. I don't have to make 20-30% profit. I could just take care of my employees. As a matter of fact, I think Henry Ford was
that guy.
There used to be discussions about him. I mean, there are some things that some people might not like about him, but one of the things that there was a discussion about is how he said that he wanted to pay his employees enough so that they could actually afford to purchase the car that they were building.
Yep.
Which is a good way of saying, hey, living wage. And so you can have a company where your employees get a living wage and you still make a profit.
And do well, and then they're encouraged to do better as you do better, and they have a vested interest in you doing well.
The founder of Walmart, he was that way. He wanted his people to live well while earning an honest living. And when he died, it turned into what we see now because of his kids or maybe because of the board that they have and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I think a lot of people did start out coming out of the 40s after, World War II was developing living wages for everyone to live well. It did go sideways when lots of corporations got into making policy. And that's where we go back to our voting. Who was voting then that developed this country into pushing these policies? It was predominantly white men. And so that is where we are doing now is a pushback, because from the 40s on, we have not had this reclamation going, okay, a lot of these are skewed towards a 1 hour direction. And to turn this boat around is impossible. But we can change the direction. We don't have to turn it around. That's ridiculous. But we can change the rudder of its direction, because it has been going one way for easily 60 years. Easily 60 years.
Well, I would say much longer than that. Doris, you wanted to say something?
Yes, and I apologize. My internet, I think because of the storm, it's so I hope I don't get cut off again.
It could be the FBI. You never know.
But it was the NSA.
The NSA.
So I apologize because I missed a big part of the discussion. But one of the things I want to say about corporations, part of the theoretical reason that they exist, it really is, and their primary goal is for the benefit of shareholders, to make money for the shareholders. But I would really submit that at this point, corporations have really become vehicles for the transfer of wealth, because what you see is that the boards, the corporate boards, a lot of the same people on different corporate boards, and this person's on that corporate board and voting for some crazy amount of money for the CEO, and to offer the CEO to come there, and then that CEO is on somebody else's board and approving, unwarranted amounts of money for the head of that corporation. And so
Doris, I'm going to give you a puzzle. I'm going to give, like I gave Joni, you have a company. It's not going to be your company, but it's going to be the company, the type of company you're talking about, the corporation talking about. How many people normally sit on the board? Do you have any idea?
Oh, I don't know for sure. I'm going to say 10, 12.
It's normally about 12. Okay, so now on the board you also have the CEO that's probably sits on the board that's there, and he has 11 other members. Now, the average family has how many people in a family? Just average. Pick a number. Doesn't matter.
I'll say 4.
Okay, 4. So that means now you have 11 times 4 is what?
44.
44. Now you have 44 members that are affected to be the company of this transfer of wealth. With those 44 people, how many brothers and sisters you think you're going to have that's on the board? So you're going to have another 4. So now we're up to about 8. We're actually up to about 88 times 4. So 4, 12, you're at 122 people that are agreeing with the money that this corporation is making because your brother, your sister, and your other brother really want you to do well because you buy all the Christmas gifts, right? So if this company is doing wrong, you actually have 122. Now, how many friends you have? How many close friends? 5?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay. I don't get on this math, Paul, so maybe you should just...
But what,
I don't either.
what I'm saying is one corporation actually funnels probably about 2,000 people in votes. That's just one simple corporation. It's such a monster to understand that when a corporation is making money, people are feeding off it like a tree, and they vote and align to it. So when their corporations are doing poorly or well, they vote that way because they don't want to see their lives affected if this goes sideways. And it's black.
Yeah, but that's short-term thinking, because I'm thinking about, corporations like Facebook, for instance, where they go and they incorporate in Ireland. And I'm like, Mark Zuckerberg, you live in the United States. You still need nice, smooth roads so that way the fire truck could come to your house and, and take out the fire if a fire started in your house. You still need, the fire department or the police to come and get your cat out of a tree. You're not going to call the people in Ireland to do that. So you need to pay taxes over here because you have responsibility to where you live.
Well, it goes back to
it's
people.
Not just about, and multiply that by a bunch of corporations that are, incorporated in the Caymans and all these other countries that don't ask a lot of questions. So what I keep saying is that we need to have people who have a long-term commitment to this country, and not just, I see that I could save 2 pennies today, so let me do what I need to do to save 2 pennies.
Well, that goes back to the original conversation we have with Trump and why people voted for him. They're very short-sighted in what they think. They think on their pockets, they think of their personal, they think of the, how to shell their money, and not for the fire department, not for the police department, not for the emergency units, not for the roads. They're like, if their car gets damaged, they're like, I'll just get a new car, where the other people are suffering because they can't afford a new car. It comes down to people over profit and policy. The only way we can we will never get rid of profit, but we have to change policy.
Yeah, they talk about some places where the tax base is so low that criminals are getting out of jail early. Criminals who should be in jail are getting out of jail early because they can't, the jail can't afford to keep them. And so that turns into a public safety issue. It's just, like I said, so short-sighted. I know Holly wanted to talk about something before we go. So, Holly? Oh, you said that you wanted to talk about because we started off talking about funerals.
Oh, it was just that I don't know if other people have had this experience, but I'm looking at obituaries more than I ever did before the pandemic. And I had a record number of seeing 3 people I knew in the obituaries. And it was just funny because there are people that you don't think of until they die, and then you think of them more than you ever did before. They're not with us anymore. You can't get the benefit of their thoughts. I'm sorry, it's kind of irrelevant, but actually it isn't, because I'm thinking that the whole thing about Mary Trump was that her brother who died was treated so abysmally by the former president of the United States. It was a personal thing that he really, pardon my language, but he really screwed her family, as she knew he was going to screw the country.
Absolutely.
And he did.
Yeah, he did.
So there you have it. There's my whole philosophy on that.
Holly, and being vocal as you are, and whoever wants to jump in, what do you think about the white supremacists in this country? Do you think there is a large amount and they're trying to push their way? And for those of you who are listening on the iHeart and the podcast, Holly is a white lady, young lady. And
not so young.
but so I'm asking you your opinion of friends and family, and do you guys talk about white supremacy at all? Does it ever come up?
Truth to tell, I don't think I know. This is remote from my experience, and in a way, you could say it's not, because I was from Oklahoma. I mean, I certainly see and know vestiges of it, but it's not personal to me. I often spoke up because no one else did it at the time. But I'm surprised about people's. We don't know what we don't know, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I actually, when I do ask some of the people I know and stuff, young men may talk about it, but a lot of women I have asked don't ever talk about white supremacy as much, and how it's affecting the country, what it's doing to the country, what their agenda is, what their format is. It's not secret anymore. It's out there. It's out there in companies, corporations, and businesses. So. I was curious. Thank you for being truthful.
Well,
thank you.
Well, if I could add just a little bit to that, I'm just thinking of James Baldwin, and you know how eloquent he is. I wouldn't even try to compare. But he says that the problem isn't really white supremacy. It's white lack of self-esteem.
Yep.
Because if the people who think that they're supreme to other people and had self-esteem, then they would not mind treating other people as human beings.
As human beings, right.
But because they have low self-esteem, they feel a need to put other people down.
Right.
I always thought that was really, really interesting. I wish I could find that quote before the next one. Well, Dr. Moon, do you know what I'm talking about? Because you ran in those circles. You unmute. I don't know if you're trying to speak. Okay, well, Dr. Moon will join us later.
Well, we're past our hour, and I want to cut off the iHeart and Apple Podcast and all the podcast stations. Thank you for joining us every Wednesday. Oh, there's Dr. Moon.
I said my story would be so long to tell, because I could talk forever. So when I do have the opportunity to speak with the group, I like to reserve my time until then.
Yes, you can go now.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Next Wednesday, we're having Ricky Nelson Jones come on, and he's going to discuss a very interesting topic. I don't want to spoil it for everyone, but please join us next Wednesday. And Dr. Moon, if you could join us the Wednesday after that, we would love to have you. Dr. Moon is so interesting. I mean, oh my gosh, and she has so much information. And like she says, it's going to take a while to get to some of that information that she has.
Thank you so much for everyone for
thank you.
Thank everyone for doing all the work you are doing. And if you're not doing anything, do something. And if you can't do anything but one thing, and that is to vote. Please vote, please vote. And I promise you, if you vote for Marylin in Montgomery County, she can't offer you this, but I have lollipops to give away. I'm just saying, I have lollipops. And if that could coerce you to vote for Marylin for Circuit Court Judge, we would love it. And send money. We need money. Send money to Marylin Pierre for Marylin.org, right? Is it .org?
Oh, well, .com. Well, actually, it's pierreforjudge.com.
Pierreforjudge.com. Thank you. And
please send money. Thank you.
And please send money.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.